Well, this is I think, a wonderful day. It's a day that I've been looking forward to for quite some time. It's the dedication of the Center for Integrated Management of Antimicrobial Resistance to the memory of Stuart Levy. And I thought what I would do is just say a few words. I won't give a extensive biography. He's did so many things during his career, but I'll say that he was a faculty member and on the staff at Tufts Medical Center for almost 50 years. I think it's 47 years. I actually met him in 1987. I remember actually the moment that I met him. It was actually in Ralph Isberg's office. Uh, uh, Many of you know that in addition to a PhD, I have an MD, but I was going straight from my medical school straight into research, and I was skipping an internship and a residency. And it was because I really couldn't fathom the ability for me anyway to span both the clinical aspects of a demanding medical career and research and basic research. And what Stuart told me that day was he thought that I should be thinking about doing an internship and a residency. And, so I immediately got the idea that, he has very strong opinions. But it was really born out of his own success, I think, of being able to combine fundamental research, clinical practice, and then be able to look down the road and be able to see what the consequences are of unregulated, unthoughtful use of antimicrobial agents. And so he was really, as you know, a giant in the field. He was, as a basic scientist, his laboratory discovered that efflux is a mechanism of tetracycline resistance. But he was also somebody very much involved in clinical practice and practice policy. He was really, I think, the leader in the concern about the overuse of antimicrobial resistance. In 1992, he actually wrote a book, The Antibiotic Paradox, that really outlined the risks of overuse of antibiotics. And it took a couple decades, but finally in 2012, the FDA actually did issue guidelines for appropriate use of antibiotics in in food-producing animals. He founded the APUA, the Alliance for the Prudent Use of Antibiotics. That had, I think, over chapters in over 100 countries, and he won many, many awards, and too many for me to list or even remember, but a few. He was president of the American Society of Microbiology. He was a fellow of the American Association for Advancement of Science, American Academy of Microbiology, and really sort of a prolific and absolutely influential, changed the way we think about how we use antibiotics as more societal drugs, which we have to be careful stewards of, rather than simply drugs, miracle drugs, which you can now cure diseases. So he retired in 2018, and part of his legacy was the fact that he had established the Center for Adaptation, Genetics, and Drug Resistance. And this was a center that he kept continuously active for all those decades. And when he was retiring, it was really the kernel of the idea of CIMAR. That is, to be able to link basic science research with clinical practice, and to then foster education about antimicrobial resistance, and be thoughtful about public policy about how we handle antibiotics. And so we established CIMAR in 2018, and we've now been quite active. Sadly, we all know that Stuart passed about a year ago. This is about the 1-year anniversary. But it's certainly gratifying to me to know that before he retired, he was able to see that CIMAR was being established, and that the work that he had carried on throughout his career at Tufts would continue on. And I'll say that we've had CIMAR for about 2 years. It's been, the directors are Ralph Isberg and Helen Boucher. David Sneidman and I are also on the leadership team, and I think the center's gone incredibly well. We now have, I think, over 30 CIMAR faculty members at Tufts Medical Center, at various schools at Tufts, and even stretching out to other Boston area institutions. In the first 2 years, we've garnered the commitment of over $15 million in grant funds, and we think we're on a very, very strong trajectory. We recently hired an executive director, Brian Noonan, who we think will be able to take us to the next level. And I think, all of this progress is really, the kernel of this idea is really due to Stuart's insight. One of the pleasures I've had in being involved in CIMAR is actually getting to know the Levy family more. Suzanne, Arthur, Walter, and of course, Cecile. And so here we are today to dedicate CIMAR in the name of Stuart Levy. And Cecile, if you could come up and I'll give you a token of today. So it has this.
Has the CIMAR logo.
Has the CIMAR logo. Yeah. And
I have this scarf.
yes. And people have bow ties as well, I think.
I know.
I have on Twitter, you'll see me with a picture with a CIMAR mask.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And thank you. And some of you may recall there's a chicken in the logo, and the chicken is an homage to a New England Journal of Medicine study that he published on a farm showing that feed in antibiotic feed now results in the acquisition of antimicrobial resistant bacteria in humans. So it's one of his landmark studies. So this is something for you to remember today's event by. Yeah. 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 So now we'll have some speakers, and I'll start off with David Sneidman. David, and actually I have a sort of a long connection with David in that I've been studying Lyme disease for something like 30 years, and David was one of the investigators who really characterized Lyme disease. And he has been at, my first faculty appointment was at Tufts Medical Center, and he was right upstairs from me. He's now emeritus chief of geographic medicine and infectious disease, and on the leadership team of CIMAR. He also has a research program on antibiotic, the narrow spectrum antibiotic use to treat C. difficile, which is a really important clinical problem. So David.
Can you hear me with my mask on? Or maybe I'll take it off. I actually wrote some remarks, but I thought I'd ad-lib to start because I don't remember exactly when I met Stuart for the first time. It could have been between 72 and 74 when I was an intern and resident. It definitely when I was a fellow in 76 that I met Stuart and came to understand his work. And I've been here ever since, and obviously he was here for all those many years, and we certainly collaborated on many patients when it was a hematology attending, and I was an infectious disease attending, and certainly he helped us in our training grants. So I'll read my written remarks so I can stay on target. I'm honored to be able to speak at this naming ceremony for the Stuart B. Levy Tufts Center for the Integrated Management of Antibiotic Resistance, or the Levy Tufts CIMAR for short. I'd like to touch briefly on what Stuart meant to the medical center, the infectious disease division, and the world. At Tufts Medical Center, Stuart was a hematologist and faculty member in the world-class division of hematology oncology under the leadership of Dr. Robert Schwartz and Jane DeForge. It was always amazing to me that he could function clinically in that domain while performing world-class research in microbiology as a member of the microbiology department under the tutelage of Dr. Elio Schechter, the chairman. The microbiology department and the ID division were very collaborative, and I first became aware of his work while I was a first-year ID fellow. His seminal work in the New England Journal of Medicine on antibiotic resistance on farms, animals, and humans was published in 1976. I re-reviewed that elegant paper recently, in which Stuart demonstrated that antibiotic supplementation of animal feed could lead to microorganisms with antibiotic resistance in animals and humans. He also demonstrated that such resistance was transferable through plasmids, which contain multiple antibiotic resistance elements. This work laid the foundation for a career in which Stuart made significant discoveries on antibiotic resistance mechanisms. He subsequently discovered energy-dependent efflux pumps that would result in resistance to tetracycline. He also notably discovered a multiple antibiotic resistance operon, which controls expression of antibiotic resistance and virulence factors in microorganisms. From the 80s, Stuart was a very visible collaborator with the ID division. He was a faculty member in our initial NIH microbial pathogenesis training grant, training our ID fellows and postdocs for over 30 years. And more recently, he was a key faculty member in our decade-long NIH clinical research training and infectious disease grant, where he trained several of our fellows who've gone on to have significant careers. As a result of these discoveries, Stuart developed an evangelical fervor, and I mean that in a good way, about the overuse of antibiotics while sounding the clarion call about antimicrobial use in animal husbandry. He was ahead of his time and voiced concern to the USDA and FDA. And of course, he founded, as John mentioned earlier, the Alliance for the Prudent Use of Antibiotics, which became a worldwide forum to hold governments, physicians, and healthcare providers accountable for how antibiotics were regulated and used in the healthcare setting. So in summary, Stuart is richly deserving of this honor for all he has meant to Tufts University, the Tufts Medical Center, and the world.
Thank you. So I thought if anybody here would like to say a few words, we're happy to have you come and speak.
Hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Suzanne. I'm Stuart's. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Suzanne. I'm Stuart's daughter, eldest child, not child anymore. Anyway, thanks to you all for being here today. Those of you who are here in person and those of you who are on the Zoom and on the phone. I saw a lot of people. I logged on from my cell, and I'm really touched by how many people took the time out of their day to even join virtually. It means a lot. And thank you to John and everyone else here from Tufts for granting my dad this great honor. As a little girl, I was always so excited to accompany my dad to the lab on a weekend if he had to go check on some tests or work on a paper. You'd think that it would be kind of a nuisance or a hassle for a 6 or 7-year-old, but I got such a kick out of it. I got to look at the Petri dishes and, you know, draw pictures that he would then put up all over his door, and it was the best. Thinking back on it this morning, I realized that going there with him was really my first exposure to what it meant to have a job. And it showed me that you could really love what you do for work. And I think that stuck with me. Microbiology and educating the world about antibiotic resistance were my dad's true passions, second only to his love for his family and friends. He was a jack of all trades, researcher, doctor, lecturer, teacher, lobbyist, etc. And I looked up to him for that as well. I was so proud to sit in the front row in one of the buildings in, forget the name of the building, while he testified to Congress about the dangers of overuse of antimicrobials in animal feed. And I selfishly benefited from his policy efforts in that I got to have him visit me in DC almost once a month the first few years that I lived there. After Dad passed away last year, I heard from so many people about the impression he had made on them and on the world in all of these various roles. I know that CIMAR will continue his legacy, and I look forward to the many great things that will come from this center. I can't imagine a better tribute than for his friends and colleagues to come to work every day at the Stuart B. Levy Tufts Center for Integrated Management of Antimicrobial Resistance. I know he's glad to remain part of the team. Love you, Dad.
Hi, I'm Arthur Levy, Stort's oldest son. So thanks everyone for being here. So yeah, I just really can't believe that it's already been a year since Dad passed away. It feels almost surreal because I still think about him every day, multiple times per day. Whenever we have a big breakthrough at my startup or when I find myself in a spontaneous crowd, I guess less so now since the pandemic, I wish I could pick up the phone and tell him. I like to think I take after his joie de vivre, but the truth is his passion and energy was unparalleled. Passion defined my father in all aspects of life, passionate about his family, but equally passionate about his work, which is why we're all here today at the Stuart Levy CIMAR naming ceremony. Dad took such great pride in it. And for me growing up as a kid, it became my work too. I was so proud of him. I read The Antibiotic Paradox at age 9. I dragged 10 copies to the Solomon Schechter book fair, wrongly, very wrongly assuming other children and their parents would be equally enthralled by the contents. Later, when I was in high school reading about titans of industries, the textbooks had black and white photos of Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller looking solemn and aloof. But even then, I knew that appearances were deceiving and that the always optimistic Stuart Levy had more in common with them than just a penchant for bow ties. Over his 6-decade career, Dad did more to alert the public about the dangerous misuse of antibiotics than anyone else. And as we know, he was a giant in his field. He spent 47 of those years here at Tufts, and he loved this glorious institution for enabling and supporting him. Like Suzanne, I remember him taking me to the lab after school and on weekends and seeing his eyes light up when he entered. I really remember it as a magical place. And again, like my sister said, it was inspiring to see someone who loved what he did so much. And so I was so grateful to hear from President Monaco and John and Eric Johnson in March that the university would be forever memorializing his accomplishments at this workplace, which he dedicated his life to. And I guess it's so timely because when the pandemic hit a few weeks later, I couldn't help but think of Dad. What would he say? What would he advise us to do? And the importance of the center and the concept of integrated management in the faces of diseases like COVID, like antimicrobial resistance with no borders and no, socioeconomic discrimination has never been more important. It also made me so happy to know, reading a Nature article a few weeks ago, that he's still doing his part. Omadacycline, the drug that he helped develop at Paratech, and I know we'll hear from Evan later, is currently being used to fight secondary bacterial infections in a subset of hospitalized COVID patients. So as Dad always reminded us, you can't use antibiotics for viruses, but you can use them for associated bacterial infections. Dad has been, and always be my biggest personal and professional inspiration. It's an honor being his son, and I hope I can keep making him proud. I miss him every day.
Hi, I'm Walter Levy. I'm Stuart Levy's youngest son, and being the youngest son, I had some advantages. Dad always talked to me about antibiotics, and he really filled me with a passion for antibiotics. I worked for a short period at Boston Children's because of Dad's passion for antibiotics, and I'll never forget when Dad was working on omadacycline. He was so excited. He was talking to me about the discovery because we would go to local pool, and Dad would just be talking about how they were on the verge of a breakthrough. And I'll never forget Dad coming into our classes and teaching him antibiotics, and all the teachers and all the biology teachers would be so surprised but thrilled at the same time because this was Stuart Levy. And at the same time, Dad didn't think of himself like that. Dad was so humble. He even though he spoke in Congress, he never wanted to brag. He was such that's the one thing that I've carried with me. Thanks to Dad, his humility really filled us all. And also I've also tried to carry on his optimism. His optimism is something that I really strive to be like, because it's something necessary, especially in this COVID. And yeah, I miss you, Dad, and I know you'd be really happy to see the center.
would anybody else like to say a few words? Right. So I think next on tap is the ability for people who are joining us by Zoom, and by the way, welcome. And I think Evan Lowe is on Zoom and would like to say a few words. I can tell you that Evan is a CEO of Paratech Pharmaceuticals, which Stuart had founded with Walter Gilbert years and years ago to look at, to try to find alternative tetracycline-derived antibiotics. We've already heard about one of the success stories. I think there's actually two tetracycline based drugs that are on the market. Evan has been at Paratech, associated with Paratech for many years, I think something like 8 years. He's had several positions there and is now CEO. So I don't know, welcome Evan.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Well,
Yes.
great. Thank you very much for the introduction. And, it's great to see the Levy family. Nice to see you, Cecile, Arthur, Walter, Suzanne, as well as having Jay on the Zoom from San Francisco. It's a real honor for me to speak at such a special event, and the privilege is for me to be here as we commemorate a mentor and a great friend in Stuart as this center gets renamed. He was a beacon of light, and he was a real mensch. He played this instrumental role in shaping how the field approaches antibiotic development and the understanding for the impact of antimicrobial resistance on our society writ large. And I think the previous family members have spoken to what a massive impact that he's had. He was a gifted and visionary scientist who made a profound impact in the field through his relentless crusade on the misuse of antibiotics, fueled by a dedication to scientific innovation to protect humanity from the global threats of AMR. And as we heard earlier, Stuart discovered the efflux mechanisms for tetracycline resistance and was among the first to document the transfer of resistance bacteria from animals to farm workers, two pivotal milestones that grounded his forward-looking focus and crusade in AMR and led, I think, to his genesis for co-founding Paratech with Wally Gilbert nearly 25 years ago. I think, as Paratech's CEO, I speak for my colleagues. We're grateful for Stuart's dedication to our company's success and his accomplishments, advancing the science that not only underpins our understanding of antimicrobial resistance, but his vision for what the world truly needed so many years ago when he imagined the founding of our company. I think we're really proud and honored now to be the honored stewards of his vision and the high quality scientific efforts of the many scientists, biologists, and clinicians who advanced NuZyra through the preclinical and early clinical development stages. A true leader and mentor to many, I can tell you wholeheartedly that the team at Paratech remains passionate and ever committed to advancing Stuart's mission of combating the daily threat of life-threatening infections while ensuring our business and team continues to foster innovation with the energy and the unrelenting dedication that he exuded on a daily basis. I, for one, miss him every day. He was always available to me when I first joined Paratech as the chairman and providing me with counsel, historical context, all the while pushing me to understand the urgency and importance of ensuring that omadacycline and Cesara got approved. He always knew that patients are waiting. Further, with the oral formulation, which in and of itself is a feat of massive accomplishment in and of itself, the community-based bacterial resistance issues that are here today are more than adequately addressed by NuZyra. Not sure how he saw all that in his crystal ball, but he certainly did. And I would like to share with you a personal note from my father, who is 93 years old. He presented in April with pneumonia. And based upon the fact that he had failed quinolones in the past, I was able to prescribe for him NuZyra. And I'm happy to report his dyspnea and cough were not COVID related, but clearly a bacterial pneumonic process for which he was fully cured 7 days later. So much thanks I give to the opportunity to work with NuZyra and at Paratech. And so this journey has become even more personal for me. While Stuart taught us a plethora of things, one that percolates to the surface is the fact that we need to be prepared. And the COVID pandemic, which has already been mentioned today, is a proof point to this critical perspective. That preparation, as we know, takes decades in our field of clinical investigation and one that is filled with challenges and opportunities. We should never shy away from the irrefutable fact that antibiotics are life-saving therapies that the world needs today and in the future. We cannot allow bugs to win, and thus we must always remain ahead of the innovation curve. In closing, with today's pandemic as a backdrop, I can say for certain the field greatly misses Stuart, misses his leadership and his commitment to improving and protecting global health. But I know this center will carry on with that passion. We're so grateful for Stuart's contributions to science and to humankind. We at Paratac remain committed to advancing his mission and will never forget the legacy he has left us with. Thank you again for the opportunity to share a few words.
Hear you, Caroline.
So I'll just briefly introduce Caroline. Caroline is former chair of the immunology department, and I worked with her in that capacity for many years. Then she moved to become vice provost for research at Tufts. And I will say, not only does she have a hand in our research priorities in that fashion, but she has been herself a member of the CIMAR faculty and works on drug resistance in Neisseria gonorrhea.
Thank you, John. I just want to send my condolences to the Levy family. I did know Stuart for a very short period of time, but before I tell you about that, I just want to tell you a little bit about CIMAR. So CIMAR, as you know, has only been in existence for 2 years. And CIMAR was established as one of 8 priority research areas at the university. And CIMAR has been, over the last 2 years, I would say, the poster child for our priority research areas at the university. It has really advanced in 3 prongs, its mission, and these 3 prongs are in total alignment with what Stuart's vision was, and that is advancing research, education, and policy, all related to antimicrobial resistance. One of the really critical things that CIMAR has done, which other centers have not been able to do, is to advance the partnership with Tufts Medical Center. And I think this is a significant accomplishment. John talked a little bit about the accomplishments of CIMAR in the last 2 years. I think they've been really extensive. He didn't talk about the educational accomplishments. CIMAR has supported educational outreach programs to Brockton High School. In the past, it was also heavily involved this summer in the Tufts Mini Medical School, which focused primarily on antimicrobial resistance. I think John highlighted some of the funding. In just 2 years, CIMAR has brought in $15 million of funding and has published more than 51 publications. And those all have to do with either basic research, clinical research, or even policy. So I think we're just delighted to be able to move forward and to honor Stuart this way in naming the center after Stuart. We're just thrilled to be able to do that at the university level. And I just wanted to say a few things personally about Stuart. So I actually started my graduate studies in the University of Rochester in the medical school in 1981, when Stuart actually founded the Alliance for the Prudent Use of Antibiotics. So I was very well aware of his work. I read all of his work throughout the years. I saw him speak when he was president of the ASM, but I never met him in person. And so I was thrilled when I came to Tufts in 2015, when I realized that his office was just 1 floor above mine. So I went up there one day and knocked on his door and introduced myself to him. And he actually knew who I was. And I was just thrilled that he actually knew who I was and knew about my work. We had a fascinating conversation. It was just, really thrilling. And when I left, I had to pinch myself to say, wow, did it really have to take this long to meet him? And he's just, 1 floor above me. And subsequently, we seemed to be on the same schedule when we would leave work at the end of the day. And he was on the 8th floor and I was on the 7th floor. And when the elevator door would open and he would be in the elevator, his face would light up and we'd start having a conversation. And it wasn't about the weather, it was always about science and what's going on in your research. And so I have to tell you, he was just such a delight to know. I'm sorry I only knew him for a short time of his life, but he was really such a delightful man. And I'm just really honored to have known him during the last years of his life. So I thank the Levy family for all of your support for CIMAR. I can tell you they're going to do some really wonderful things. So thank you again for coming here this afternoon. We're just thrilled to be able to name CIMAR after Stuart. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jenko. We've unmuted Elio again. Are you able to speak?
I'm on the screen.
Oh, there we go. All
Yeah.
right, here we go.
Okay. Well, first of all, let me say I'm delighted to meet the Levy family. It was not my pleasure to meet you when I was in Boston, but that's a while ago. I left in 1995, so you do the math. The reasons I don't know, I didn't know you. Anyhow, it's a pleasure, and I was delighted to hear what you had to say about your dad. Next, let me tell you, I was Stuart's boss. Now, there is an oxymoron, if there ever was one. Stuart's boss? There's no such thing. He was, if anything, he was my boss. But I must say, everything that in my interactions, it was nothing but pleasure. Because any time I had something to ask him to do, which was rarely, he did it with aplomb and with love and with a tremendous amount of skill. So having Stuart in the department was a very special thing because the rest of us were a bunch of PhDs. He was the only guy with medical training and with an outlook on the world that was totally different from ours. We were a bunch of very academically oriented, sort of backwards troglodytes. And he brought us out of that. He made us understand there was a big wide world out there, and that what we were talking about, what he was talking about, really belonged there. He belonged in that world. So we learned from Stuart a tremendous amount. Now, somebody mentioned this already, but I must say, it is really, it's tragic that he's not around because Stuart is the person who would have been able to set us straight on any of a number of issues dealing with the coronavirus. His ability to bridge the gap between the scientific, theoretical, let's call it aspect of an issue and the practical one was amazing. He did this without, it was seamless, and at the same time he maintained this incredibly high level of ability and skill. So the world misses him, not just us. But I'm saying thank you for letting me talk to you. I'm talking to you from San Diego, which is a ways. So I hope you could hear me. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Elio. I was going to see if anybody else on Zoom would like to say any words.
Yes, if anyone would like to speak, please let me know in the chat. And we haven't heard from anyone else who would like to speak, John.
So then I'd like to introduce Helen Boucher. Helen is the Chief of Geographic Medicine and Infectious Disease. She is one of the directors of CIMAR and has a long and storied career in antimicrobial resistance, has really impacted policy on a large scale in this country. And I'd say that one of the benefits for me for CIMAR has been to be able to partner with Helen these last 2 years and to try to move the center forward. Helen.
Thanks very much, John. Good afternoon. Jay, Suzanne, Arthur, Walter, and Cecile. It's an honor to be with you, and thank you for sharing this anniversary with us. I can promise on behalf of all of us at CIMAR that we're going to do our utmost to preserve Stuart's legacy and all the work that we do as we move forward in the next few years. I thought I would just share a reading that I hope resonates on this really special day. It's from the book of Deuteronomy. I put before you life and death, Choose life. See, I set before you today life and prosperity, death and destruction. For I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, to keep his commands, decrees, and laws. Then you will live and increase. The Lord your God will bless you in the land you are entering to possess. This day I call heaven and earth as witnesses about you that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life, that you and your children may live. You have served so many well. You have given life. You have saved some many from the captivity of their illness. May the blessings you have bestowed on others now be given to you many times over. Amen.
Hi, before we have another in-person speaker, I believe Jay Levy would like to say a few words. So I will unmute him now.
For those of you who don't know Jay, as soon as you see him, you'll know how he's related to Stuart.
Anyway, this is a real joy to see this celebration at Tufts. As they said, Tufts was a real home for Stuart. I just have a couple words to say that I've always emphasized that my brother really discovered the efflux mechanism. It's for antibiotics, but soon was discovered by Vic Lynn for anti-cancer drugs and so forth. A really great accomplishment. But also I'd like to say that because of what he was working on to make sure antibiotics were used in the correct way, I always wondered why they didn't respell the name stewardship. That's what he was really campaigning and making sure that people knew about. So my final word is, I couldn't think of a better day to have this celebration. As many of you know, it's the New Year for Jewish people, the Rosh Hashanah. And I would say for CIMAR, it's a great way of opening this center. It's a fine center at Tufts and making it in honor of my brother. So thank you very much.
So now I'd like to introduce Ralph Isberg, who is another director of CIMAR. Very, of course, accomplished scientist. I think his main contribution to science is he trained John Leong. I was a postdoctoral fellow with Ralph years and years ago. And I think what is interesting in the context of CIMAR is that Ralph first became interested in antimicrobial resistance due to exposure to clinical medicine. That is, he was teaching infectious disease to second-year medical students and teaching them about antibiotic-resistant bacteria, especially a particular one, Acinetobacter. And since that time, he became interested and now has a really growing and burgeoning, very successful research program trying to understand the evolution of drug resistance in that bacterium. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Ralph.
Well, thank you. I just want to explain to you that this is a really blessed event, not only for you, but for us as well. And John and Helen put in an incredible amount working this to happen. It was a vision. I remember the first time I walked into John's office, it was maybe 4 years ago, when he had this idea to have this center named after Stuart. And there were a lot of twists and turns. At one point, I thought this wasn't going to happen, but it did. And you know, I just can't imagine being a part of the center if it didn't have Stuart's name on it. I got to tell you how closely associated Stuart's name is with Tufts, actually. When I go to Europe and I see people who may not be scientists, but kind of peripherally associated with science and development or something like that, and I tell them I'm at Tufts, they say, "Oh, do you know Stuart Levy?" And I said, "Yes, of course, he's a colleague of mine." And now, I can't say that anymore. I didn't want to say, when I have the opportunity to go to Europe again, hopefully, I don't want to be able to say, well, he was a colleague of mine. Now I can say, yeah, he was a colleague of mine, and now I'm working at a center that's named after him, and he's part and parcel of my life for as long as, hopefully, I'm associated with this program. And I just want to say, you know, what an opportunity it is to be associated with his name. How happy everybody, all of us are to have this particular program named after him. And also in just to amplify what Jay said, that this has been a rotten year for everybody. It's been terrible for everybody. It's been, I'm sure, not the group. It's probably about as rotten a year as it could be for your family. But what I want to say is that going forward, I think this gives us real hope in the coming year, and may the hope from the center go forward in the coming new year, and give us the momentum to have a really change in life over the next year.
So I think that concludes our ceremony. I will say that we hope in the future, when we can actually more easily get together in person, that we will have another type of celebration, maybe a symposium. That would be a time for us to come together again and see. We can give you an update on where CIMAR is and be able to meet friends, family, and colleagues in person. So thanks so much, and what a wonderful day for Stuart's memory and for your family.